Good morning, colleagues. I think people are joining, so we will let that process continue. And I think it's best that we start, because I know that colleagues have other commitments throughout the day, so I don't want to keep people, waiting. Thank you very, very much for indeed, making the time to come to the session this morning. A very warm and good morning to everyone attending today. I am Dr. Natisha Duki. I'm part of the SAYAS Exco. And this webinar was a culmination of collaboration, between ASAF and SAYAS. And it is indeed a privilege for us to have this event today, purely based on the history that exists in South Africa. And we know that, this webinar commemorates Youth Day. But there's a history behind it that speaks to what progressed in 1975 due to the protest that started predominantly in African schools due to the directive of the Bantu education system that, insisted upon Afrikaans be used as an equal medium to the English medium language of instruction at secondary schools. And it was not so much that it was Afrikaans as a whole system of the Bantu education, but it was characterized by separations of schools, segregation of universities, poor facilities, overcrowding of classrooms, and obviously inadequately trained teachers at that time. On June 16, 1976, it was more than 20,000 pupils from Soweto that began a protest march. What was essentially supposed to be a peaceful protest turned into a clash with police, and violence ensued. And over that time, approximately 700 people, many of them youth, were killed and the property was destroyed. What also lets us know about this day is the fact Maxine. Colleagues, can we please mute? So one thing that comes to mind is a picture very etches in our minds very predominantly when we speak of Youth Day, is the picture of a young gentleman carrying another student that had been shot during the protest.
What level is your questions in a pitch deck?
Sorry, Henriette, can we please mute all? Thank you. So what we have, as I said, or what we had sketched in our minds regarding June 16th each year is a picture of an older student carrying a younger 12-year-old student that was shot, obviously, by the police during that time, with his sister running beside him. And we remembered this about Hector Peterson. I was fortunate enough last year to be in Soweto during this time, and I got to meet his sister at that time. And so from that culmination, we felt that it was important that we bring to you something that was in celebration of youth and, leave behind the history and moving forward. And so SAYAS with ASAF, we felt that it was one of our objectives to develop a vision on an ideal way to supporting emerging researchers, the youth of today and tomorrow. And so we have a panel discussion this morning that features four highly esteemed scientists at various categories of life, and I will introduce them shortly. And we have a format of a webinar that takes place with me introducing them. There are 3 questions posed to these panelists, and then I will open up a Q&A session, obviously, for our esteemed audience, as well as we recently have just come back from a very successful conference that was held at the University of Venda. And the delegates that were at this conference have also posed some questions that I will also pose to the panelists. So without further ado, I'm going to once again say good morning to everyone. Thank you for indeed making time for this panel discussion this morning. Thank you to all the panelists for also making the time and accepting my invitation. It is greatly appreciated. And to start off this event, colleagues, I think it's best, we're going through a process of load shedding, and I know that, we don't want to interfere with the bandwidth. Also, when we start the session, if everyone can mute, just some housekeeping rules, telephones kept on silent. Please can everyone be muted? Please can all cameras be off? The only cameras I think for now that we can, would be great, would be for the panelists as I introduce them. And I do understand that they may have load shedding issues as well. So if they are unable to utilize their cameras, that's understandable. So kicking off today, I'm going to introduce you to 4 panelists. The first panelist, I will read a biography, or a short biography rather, of each panelist. The first panelist being Professor Usisipo Feleni. Usisipo Feleni is an associate professor at the Institute for Nanotechnology and Sustainability in the School of Science at UNISA. Her research expertise is on the electrochemical biosensors, electrocatalysis, catalysis for monitoring disease biomarkers, such as pathogens for SARS-CoV-2, pharmaceutical contaminants in water, and carbon capture. She has more than 45 publications in the various in areas of various nanomaterials and their applications in electrochemical sensors, electrocatalysis, and photocatalysis. Additionally, she has graduated 3 MSc students at UNISA and is currently supervising as well as co-supervising 6 MSc, 6 PhD, and mentoring 1 postdoctoral fellow. Prof. Feleni obtained external research grants from various sources, including TIA, NRF, SASTA, TSP, SC, WIR, and University of Michigan STEM Africa Initiative. Her recent awards and recognition include the Principals Award for Excellence in Research 2022, the University of Michigan African Presidential Scholars Fellowship 21-22, the South African Department of Science and Innovation Tata Women in Science, as well as the Engineering and Technology Award 2016 and the L'Oreal UNESCO Women in Science Doctoral Fellowship Awards 2016. I present to you Prof. Feleni. Prof. Feleni, if you could, thank you for the camera. That's great. My next panelist that I would like to introduce is Dr. Mobeen Ghulam, is a group leader in the Department of Human Biology and the Neuroscience Institute at the University of Cape Town. Mobeen received his undergraduate and MSc degrees from the University of Cape Town before being awarded the Mary Gray Fellowship to St. John's College at the University of Cambridge, undertaking a PhD in physiology, development, and neuroscience in the Zenica Kutz's lab. He then moved to the University of Oxford as a junior research fellow to Wilson College and took up a postdoctoral position in the Sir William Dunn School of Pathology in the Robertson lab. He established his independent research group in 2020, and research in his lab focuses on using stem cells to model development and disease in culture. They are developing the first Africa-specific brain organoids to study neural development and disease from an African perspective. I present to you Dr. Mobeen Ghulam. My next panelist is Dr. Bronwyn Coetzee, who is a senior lecturer and a National Research Foundation Y1 rated researcher in psychology at Stellenbosch University. Dr. Coetzee is a member of the South African Young Academy of Science and an executive member of the Physiological Society of South Africa, Division for Research and Methodology. She teaches child psychology at undergraduate as well as postgraduate levels. In terms of her research, Dr. Coetzee's research is broadly located within the fields of health, psychology, and mental health. Her research focuses on factors affecting treatment adherence amongst children, adolescents, and adults living with HIV in South Africa. Her research also focuses on developing and implementing interventions to support psychological well-being amongst children and adolescents in South Africa. I present to you Dr. Bronwyn Coetzee. And last but not least, I have Dr. and I'm going to get this right. It's Prof. Olanrewaju Oladimeji, and his bio indicates that Professor Oladimeji is an associate professor of public health and research coordination at the Department of Public Health, Faculty of Health Sciences, Walter Sisulu University. He also has an adjunct affiliation with the Faculty of Health Sciences at Durban University of Technology. He is an NRF Y1 rated researcher a guest editor for Nature Scientific Reports of a special edition entitled Health Disparities, a section editor for the Journal of Public Health in Africa, and an editorial advisor for F1000 Gateway Global Public Health. I present to you Prof. Ola Dimeji. All right, so I have introduced all panelists, and I will now proceed to the next part of the session where I have shared with the panelists 3 questions. Panelists, I would like a short response, if possible, from each of you about these 3 questions. I'm going to kick off with the first question being, what are the different levels of support systems for the next generation of scientists? And I'm going to open the floor for anyone to volunteer first from the 4 panelists. Okay, Bronwyn, would you like to go first?
Okay.
Bronwyn, we can't. Can anyone hear Bronwyn?
Can you hear me now?
No.
Yes. Now I can hear you. Please go ahead.
It was a different kind of mute, so sorry about that. So for me, the questions about the different levels of support systems for the next generation of scientists. I think when we think about the next generation, we also think about, the nurturing of scientists in school, and then also in academic and institutions of higher education and learning. And when we think about the levels of support, I guess we do need to think about what we mean by support. So we'll talk about financial support, so bursaries, grants, scholarships, funding opportunities, or administrative support, so access to library resources or well-equipped labs, or even assistance with registration of programs, or lab or technical support, educational and learning support, so bridging programs, study groups, access to affordable learning materials. And I'm mentioning all of these different levels of support because, it's important to identify these various structures and then to think about, those that are being offered and perhaps, where some gaps still remain. So in terms of educational and learning support, so thinking about access to affordable learning materials or support in classrooms and lecture rooms, through tutor programs, writing support, so access to writing labs and academic writing support, and at school, sort of the same thing. And then throughout, schooling and into academia, really good mentoring and career development, or guidance support. Through early career programs, training workshops, or networking opportunities. And then, of course, I would need to emphasize as well, mental health support. So, we know a large proportion of students on university campuses, for example, struggle with their mental health. And while there may be student counseling and support systems in place, and there are at various institutions and certainly a lot of initiatives, there's also waiting times and finding ways, or long waiting times. And so it's important to find ways to identify students who are struggling and connect them to support. So a lot of these support levels of support that I've mentioned are available and in place, also, I guess, varying depending on perhaps the schools or the university, that you're based at. But more importantly, connected to this is creating awareness of the structures that are in place, and then connecting learners and students to these various places of support. And then also, offering and making aware of the support around students with perhaps learning difficulties and disabilities, and making things as accessible as possible. So I think, it's really also key for us to create then these healthy academic and research environments that support opportunities for growth. And so through these various levels of support, which are in place across institutions, that awareness and connection for me is quite important.
Okay, I was muted, so thank you for that. I know that you guys are a bit shy in terms of the panelists, so I'm going to just call any one of the panelists next. I'm going to give Prof. Oladimeji a chance to answer.
Okay, thanks, Natisha, and good morning, everyone. I'm not sure if I'm very audible. Can you hear me, Natisha?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. I think it's been well presented by the previous speaker, but I just feel like one important component of ensuring that we provide supportive environment for the next generation, scientists or researchers, is to ensure that we have mentorship in place, is to ensure that people are shown how things should be done, is to ensure that people feel confident, people feel supported, is to show people how to do it while they are learning in the process. So I think while you have all the infrastructure, you have the funding, we also need to ensure that part of providing conducive environment for the next generation scientists to thrive is to begin to have structured mentoring program, maybe by department, by discipline, by faculty, or even at institutional level. I think that on its own, we make the ideas of connecting the next generation scientists to realization of the kind of research agenda that we want to see in the country. I want to say that we all think about research. We want to do research. We want to be known, but it's high time that we really begin to connect, our innovations to, for an example, national development agenda and goals, and that can only happen or be realized if we are able to get structure, mentoring in place, whereby we have the older researchers, the emeritus professors, through some international collaboration, some people overseas, kind of a group mentorship where it's possible, to have the upcoming scientists to put the agenda, the research agenda and ideas probably right or relevant to align with what is it that could be contributory to national development. So in summary, for me, mentorship, structured mentorship will be one of the key components of providing a thriving, conducive, enabling environment for the next generation scientists. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Prof. I'm going to now pass the very same question to Prof. Eleni.
Thank you so much, Natisha, for that question. So you've asked the question on what are the different levels of support systems for the next generation of scientists. So my answer to that question is, first of all, we need to do a lot of empowerment. Empowerment through seminars and workshops. So the reason why I'm talking about empowerment, I'm talking about discussing the current issues on United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Reason being, there's an issue of cholera already in Johannesburg. So if we can empower through seminars and workshops, we could have solutions for all these problems that we are facing, not only in South Africa, but worldwide. Another important empowerment issue is that we should be discussing Africa Agenda 2063, one of the aspirations there, I think it's aspiration 6, talks about nurturing youth and equipping them. So we should enforce nurturing young scientists by equipping them with the challenges that we're facing and how we could solve those issues through research activities. Another important point that I want to raise is that we should also talk about or provide knowledge on the development of science and innovation, research strategies, and grant challenges. Of course, my colleagues here talked about the issue of scholarship. If we can enforce the issue of scholarships and showcase or show the next generation on how to prepare applications for fellowships and grants. And of course, when us emerging researchers have released research grants, we need to be able to talk about management and implementation and reporting of research and resources or researchers and students involved in that particular work. And of course, the issue of mentorship. It's very important that we mentor the next generation into the next level, and also to formulate collaboration nationally and internationally, and so that we can form some sort of networks so that the next generation will be very much equipped in understanding the societal issues and what we are facing, not only in South Africa, but worldwide in general. Thank you for that question.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, I'm going to pose this very same question to Dr. Ghulam.
Thanks, Natisha. I think my colleagues have answered in a lot of excellent ways. So I'm going to give some, I think, specific examples of places where you can find support. I think the support in South Africa at the tertiary level, at university level, is exceptional. And there's 3 sort of places to look. One is the Department of Science and Innovation. The DSI has a lot of support programs for young learners. There's obviously governmental agencies like the NRF and the SAMRC have lots of funding opportunities available to you. The DSI also has, together with the Human Science Research Council, a really great internship program. You get your hands wet in the lab. That's a good place to look. So besides the government organizations, there are where you can look for excellent funding and ways and internships to get into education and science. There's also private funders are quite invested in South African and South African students, and that requires a little bit of hunting around. There's a whole bunch of individual investors who will invest in particularly tertiary education levels. There's Canons Collins Trust, there's Dell, who has a huge program. A whole host of other companies will have investment opportunities. So it's a good place to look for opportunities for funding and to get yourself into the science world. And the other place to look is at the university levels. South African universities are really quite excellent at providing support for their research. So lots of universities have programs specifically designed to help students through funding and support, and also importantly, as one was mentioning, the mental health support. So within individual universities will have excellent programs in place. I was just thinking, and just because I saw Prof. Burton in the room, there's this incredible new campus at University of Pretoria, the Future Africa program, which I think is going to be one of those levels of support for next generation scientists. And there's programs like that all around the country. I don't think there's a shortage at tertiary level. There are levels where you can do better, but there are specific programs where you can look for support. Thanks, Tisha.
Thanks so much. And I think the gist of what we're getting from our 4 panelists is that Dr. Ghulam and Dr. Coetzee mentioned funding, and Dr. Coetzee mentioned scholarships and other resources that are essential, while Professor Ola Dejeme focused on mentorship being very, very important. And then we had Prof. Feleni indicating that if we're having these hardships, especially for our youth, we need to focus and reorientate things towards the African context. We'll be looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2063. And you can see how it's coming together and aligns with what each of these panelists have indicated so far. So the next question for our panelists is, what are the challenges faced by a next generation of scientists? And for this, I'm going to give the floor first to Prof. Feleni.
Thank you, Natisha. for
If you
the
would like to leave your cameras on during your answers, you may do so.
Okay, thank you so much. So, okay, your second question is based on what are the challenges faced by the next generation? So I had an opportunity of visiting schools, high schools in my hometown in Tsotsmevaba and also in Johannesburg. So what I've realized is that we're facing a lot of issues is that we do not train our next generation on hands-on activities because most of the schools do not have laboratories. Yes, they may have a lot of knowledge in terms of maybe nanotechnology and other scientific skills, but we do not train the next generation on the hands-on activities. And another important challenge that we are facing is that we have an issue of artificial intelligence. So we have an issue of how to integrate that artificial intelligence in our research and its possibility of interference in research intellectual property. Thirdly, we also have an issue of competitiveness. There's high competitiveness of other countries, such as China. So they develop technologies very quickly, whereas we are trying to figure out how we could solve a particular problem. So there's high competitiveness that we are facing as the next generation. And fourthly, because we talked about finance in the first round, how we can, try to support the next generation. But we have a very serious imbalance in financial resources that will really, really affect international networking and collaboration. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Prof. Feleni. I'm now going to pose the very same question to Dr. Ghulam.
Thanks, Disha. I think Prof. Feleni hit on my main point, which was the financial barriers and the discrepancies between others. So I won't rehash that point, but I think also something that holds a lot of us back is inadequate infrastructure and access to resources in South Africa. In some fields, we are without a doubt the world's best. If you look at some of I'm thinking more of a tertiary level here again. In some places, we are world leaders in sort of infectious disease research and some climate change areas. In some aspects of research, we are really well funded and do incredible work. But in others, we lack some of that world-class infrastructure that's going to drive us ahead. And I think that's because there is limited research funding in South Africa. We are very tightly run. But because there's limited research funding, I think that's also, while it's a challenge, it's also quite an important way of development for next generation scientists. You will be hamstrung by a lack of research funding, but it teaches you to be a better scientist because you have to approach science with having limited amount of funding. So you have to think about what kind of experiments and what things you can do, which makes you approach questions from a more universal perspective. The other thing that I was thinking of being a challenge is sort of because we have to develop collaborations with the Global North to help drive our research forward. These can often be quite unintentionally predatory. A lot of Global North collaborators in South Africa using African labs to get access to materials and samples, and that the African researchers will play a big part in them. That's a bit of a bigger issue at a higher level, but African researchers sometimes are seen as junior partners when you partner with Northern universities, which is why I think the best way to approach that kind of challenge of Northern Hemisphere researchers is to build partnerships and collaborations within our continent. I think African research is stunning and there's incredible researchers all across the continent, and building collaborations with other African researchers is a good way to overcome it. And then finally, I think it's point that was also mentioned previously by my colleagues, there is a limited sort of mentorship and guidance for younger research. And I think that falls upon us. If you are established at university, we need to provide guidance, mentorship to the next generation of people. There isn't it's a very top heavy South African universities, a lot of support at the highest levels, but we don't pass on that support effectively sometimes to at the lower levels. So I think that's an important area of building and development, where the absence of the mentorship and guidance that others have mentioned is an important aspect that we can work on. That's a challenge that we can address. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to now hand over this very same question to Prof. Ola Dimeji.
Yes, thank you very much. just to check again if you can hear me very well.
Yes.
Thank you. I think just among all the things that have been mentioned, in terms of the challenges, talking about infrastructure and funding, resources and equitable distribution of resources is one challenging issues, and that's sort of it's not really easy to get into. And I've been into some meetings where fundings and distribution of research fund is completely been skewed to, some established institutions. So I think one of the biggest challenges is that equitable distribution of the resources that is there. And the other thing I think is the when we are in a highly political charged region, and that also plays some interest in how resources are given, in how people are mentored, in how support are being provided. So that's another challenge that is also difficult, to get into. How do we deal with issue of highly politically charged environment, that kind of dynamics and the balance when you talk about innovation, research, and now we're talking about emerging people. We're talking about upcoming scientists that are not yet established. How do we create access? So it's all about access, creating opportunity, especially for less developed, institution, for rural people who have come from other less privileged background. Balancing all of those things are things that I see as challenges. I just want to mention the issue of mentorship and build on that as one of the main things. If we can look at the mentorship program, especially the traditional mentoring practice in the STEM field in South Africa, you realize that this does not completely, incorporate the cultural and also some of the other important dynamics. I am basically trying to challenge the traditional mentoring practices in STEM field, because it's challenging in the sense that maybe we're a bit slow to quickly move on to the more robust, culturally flexible, mentoring program. So we've got limited resources, we've got structures that are also limited, but the problem is equitable access, equitable distribution, as to when it comes to the upcoming scientists. So I think we need to continue, to challenge those challenges. So it's all about unequal distribution, unequal access. Those are big challenges, and we need to begin to discuss about how is it that they should be addressed. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I'm going to now hand this very same question over to Dr. Coetzee.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think the colleagues before me have all raised very, very important points. And I think one comment that sort of struck me and stuck with me was actually in Prof. Feleni's sort of speaking about the emphasis that is needed on learners at schools and what we need in place there. So also when we think about the word challenges, it's interesting because you think about the issues or the difficulties that the next generation of scientists will face in terms of how they manage their careers and the decisions that they make going forward, from the school years already, then into tertiary institutions, and also not taking for granted that young people who come into an undergraduate program who have a particular idea about a career are necessarily doing what it is they're interested in. And so that, making sure that we also sort of check that along the way and support and provide guidance, even, when we've assumed that some decisions about careers have been made, that there's still support. But then there's also thinking about challenges in the terms of also what Prof. Feleni identified with her first answer was, these challenges that they will face in terms of the grand challenges that the next generation will need to deal with, so mentioning outbreaks like cholera as before, but also we know a major grand challenge will be dealing with climate change and everything that goes with that, including mental health difficulties around that. So I think for this discussion, we've certainly focused on some of the challenges that they are facing in terms of, making decisions about their careers. But perhaps if we can, so Prof. Feleni's reflections about her outreach to the schools and what is necessary there makes me think that if we are talking about the next generation of young scientists, we also need to think about what is happening in our schools and what is happening sort of in our primary schools and our secondary schools. And I think, even before we begin to think about how we support the next generation of scientists, assuming that certain structures and education is in place, we actually need to go back and look at what is happening in terms of education. So I think one of the most striking things recently, which isn't really a surprise to us, I think the surprise is just that the issue is getting worse, is that, for example, at least or more than 80% of our grade 4 pupils aren't able to read for meaning. And so, we need to think, and this shift also seems to be related to some of the pressures that have come from, what our learners have faced, and our learners and teachers have faced in schools in the aftermath of COVID. So just finding ways to support learners and teachers in managing the academic and school curriculum, and creating those spaces then where that can be addressed before we also begin to think about how we begin to nurture and inspire and create various opportunities. So I think, helping young people and their teachers, parents, communities to, first of all, contain a lot of the pressure from the aftermath of that is important, and providing structures in terms of supporting basic things such as being able to read for meaning, and making sure that we're doing that early on, towards nurturing and providing opportunities for young people who might otherwise not even have considered careers in science, and then in an academic space also, I think an important thing in addition to mentorship and opportunity, which is fundamental, and I absolutely agree with that, is at the same time balancing that against just an awareness that there may be a lot of pressure on young people to perform. And even though we can sort of list where resources are available and where they can go look and do this and that, that comes with a lot of pressure, but it also comes with an acknowledgement that young people need support to engage with those services, and need guidance, and need more than just us pointing things in a certain direction. So I've really just wanted to add on some of the many good points that the colleagues before me had raised.
Thanks so much. And I think in summary, again, in alignment of what the four of you have said, it's starting at grassroots, the challenges, start at school. And what are we looking at the curriculum? Are we empowering not just students, but the teachers, the communities, the parents of these school kids? And then looking at what goes beyond, we're going all the way from grassroots to tertiary, looking at some of the ideas that the panelists have brought forward, such as mentorship and funding coming through again. So I think it's important. I think members of the audience, keep your questions ready. I'm going to the last question now, and soon we're going to open up the panel for discussion. I think there's a lot of relevance to what the 4 panelists are saying, and quite aligned at the moment. So the last question that is posed by myself and my colleagues from the SciAS Exco is, how do we inspire a next generation of scientists? And what are the opportunities and support mechanisms that we could or should be developing? So that's the last question from us before we open up the panel discussion further. And this time around, I'm going to give Prof. Oladimeji a chance to answer first.
Okay, thank you so much. I think the answer actually came right away before the question. So for me, I think at grassroots, part of the opportunities there should be that we look at the mechanism to identify talent from the lens early enough, and it will also go into mechanism to support those in talent. So a heavy identification of talented individual, part of the things that will really be helpful. And I think if we look at the setup at the grassroots, the schools are not just alone, they are within the communities. I also feel that community we need to engage them in terms of research effort, making them understand, the benefits, the societal benefits of research, and we synergize those partnership within the schools and the community, and then from the grassroots, we're able to identify the talent, skills, and of course structures and in place to mentor, groom, stimulate, motivate, those talents and nurture them going forward. At the tertiary, within the academic environment, I think the opportunities that are in there sort of some institutions are known for certain programs, certain let's support paid research activities, particular research innovation. I think that needs to be encouraged, that needs to be reinforced, that needs to be well funded, that needs to be well motivated. I think that's where we can begin to realize what we call a knowledge economy. That's where we can begin to use research to answer pertinent or address, or rather solve pertinent issues within the country. So it's all about identifying certain institutions, for doing exceptional research activities. And I think these are great opportunities, and for the emerging scientists, it's all about aligning, stimulating them as well to get into this pathway in helping research process to address country issues. Some of the other opportunities will be through some of these structures is to encourage, continue to to encourage some networks and partnership across institutions within the country, encouraging multidisciplinary research activities that relevant to national developmental goals, and of course, working across the Pan-African countries, institution, and even beyond African region. It's all about when it gets to a global research idea, we also able to put forward, the need for the country in that agenda. So I also think the other opportunities that they rather support is to quickly leverage on the technology. You see, technology is taking over. Artificial intelligence. We need to be quick to be able to use this to our advantage. So at the tertiary, a highly research stimulating environment, how is it that we see how to leverage on the very advanced technology that people have every day, and how is it that we can use them to address some of the major issue. I think just yesterday I was having a chat with a friend of mine talking about the machine learning, and he was trying to tell me how they're organizing a workshop to use machine learning to predict, rather forecast issues and talk about solutions ahead of time. So I think these opportunities are in there. We just need to come up with, a robust idea on how to be able to optimize the opportunities relating to technology to advance our scientific agenda, and that will also be relevant to motivate the upcoming scientists. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I'm gonna now hand over to Dr. Ghulam.
Thanks, Natisha. I think Professor Dimeji covered a lot of ground there. And I think, yeah, it's to repeat some points. It's about early exposure and awareness of science at the grassroots level, at schools, introducing science and teaching hypothesis-driven research at an early stage, having sort of things like science fairs, exhibitions, getting and hands-on experiments. I think Prof. Feleni mentioned early on, but having hands-on experiments, being able to do actual things, and take part in experiments at a very early age is a really way that you can inspire people, to young children, to be involved in science. They see what kind of things you can do with a few basic experiments. It's quite exciting and sparks interest and curiosity. In order to make those things work, we need financial support at that grassroots level. We need better funding opportunities for scholars and students to be able to have access to these things. And I think one of the potential ways, and I go back to it, I think that's an important aspect, is internships and fellowships are really important. But I think spending a few months in the lab here and there when you're at school or when you're just doing your undergrad level is a really interesting way to get you more involved with what higher levels of scientific endeavor and to be in this science what's going to be like. So I think increasing funding for internships and placements and getting kids into universities at an early stage to have a look around and get some hands-on experience is an important kind of thing. And then the final sort of point was increasing the aspects of mentorship and role models. Successful science in Africa should be promoted more and be more visible in the context of across the country. While we have so many incredible work being done all across the country in so many different fields, we don't really hear about it. It tends to stay within the field itself, as opposed to be promoted better. And so that is a need for better science communication to a wider general audience to show the kind of incredible work that's been going on in our country that the next generation of scientists could one day be involved in. I think I'll stop there. Thanks, Natisha.
Thank you so much. I'm going to hand over next to Dr. Coetzee.
Thank you, Natisha. I really only can add on what my colleagues have already said at this stage. And so for me, when I think about how we inspire the next generation, we need to think about spaces and opportunities for them to really embrace passion and to nurture their curiosity, as Ghulam mentioned. So spaces in schools and classrooms and spaces on campuses, because through this, this curiosity and this passion, it will drive innovation, and innovation will lead to those ideas that offer us some sustainable and long-term solutions. No matter the structural or environmental constraints that we face, if we have the opportunity to think and have spaces to think creatively and to nurture our passion. So again, to come back to sort of the schools and thinking about schools as spaces of embracing passion and nurturing curiosity, we do still face some of the issues mentioned in your opening remarks around crowded classrooms and overwhelmed teachers. And as much as we think about inspiring towards passion, we also need to think about, passion in our teachers too. So having these spaces where we can do creative experiments and where we can engage, young people in, having research or science-orientated thinking will also come from the inspiration that they get from their teachers. So I get, and from parents and the supporting community. So finding ways to engage there, I think, is also going to be important to inspire young people. So the other points about mentorship are fundamental. That mentorship comes from the exposures at school and then also right throughout pursuing any education at tertiary level institutions. And then, of course, part of inspiring is knowing what's available to me, what are the opportunities, and that links to the opening question, which was all about what are the systems of support available. So we get inspired when we see, opportunities that have emerged. I think it was the NSTF, that announced their NSTF Brilliance program, that announced their 18 first-year students in science, medicine, and technology this morning, who are being supported through that program. So being aware of that, as we mentioned earlier, is important to inspire. As both colleagues before me have mentioned, those opportunities then to collaborate more with academics and researchers in industry and beyond, and in governments as well, at much earlier points in their career, which all leads towards thinking about the possibilities of having a future in science and being inspired by that.
Thanks so much. And last but not least, Prof. Eleni.
Thank you, Natisha. So my answer to the last question is that I'm very happy to mention that UNISA is part of the Coffin-Vaba Science Center. And one of the exhibits that I lead there is based on nanotechnology applications. And when we're applying for this science center, or the section, we were told, or we were tasked to come up with a curriculum that will be incorporated from grade 8 to grade 12, because we need to ensure that we provide a lot of support that can sparkle or spark the curiosity and interest, as well as confidence to the next generation. So we should really enforce participation in science centers so that at high school and primary schools, the learners are able to have a lot of curiosity and interest from a very young age. And there's a lot of reasons for having researchers who are getting recognition, such as South African Women in Science, L'Oreal Women in Science, and National Science and Technology Forums. So we need to connect this young next generation with the role models that can mentor and guide them and inspire them, because that's the whole point of having researchers that are well known or have gotten a lot of recognition worldwide or in South Africa. So we need to ensure that we connect young scientists and award winners to give motivational talks. And lastly, just to talk about developing platforms that will enable next generation to obtain research scholarships and strategies for collaborating on national and international funding opportunities. Thank you so much, Natisha.
Thanks so much. And I think again, the alignment of our panelists of, are we doing it right? Are we doing schools outreach correctly? Are we, do we need to be inclusive of much more than we're currently doing? Do we need to go and spend more time? Do we need to reorientate our current funding? So there's not only available for at the postgraduate level, but we also serving at the grassroots level, that we are making our funds available to tackle and to empower, to motivate and inspire students at the school level, because this is where it all begins. So thank you very, very much, panelists, for answering all of the questions posed by myself and the members of the SAIS Exco. I'm now going to open the panel. I do have a few questions. As I said previously, we have just returned from the annual Young Scientists Conference that was held at the University of Venda. We had a conference questionnaire, and obviously the young delegates had given us some questions, which we also asked because we did highlight that there was an event today. And so I will pose some of those questions to you, and maybe you have covered some of them, but I think I'm going to open this floor for the next 30 minutes. It is now 12 noon on my clock for the audience to put through some questions. So audience, you may please go ahead with questions. If you would like, you can put your camera on to pose a question to a specific panelist, or if you would like the panel in general to answer. And then in between, I will pose one or two of the questions because there has been some of the answers covered already. So please go ahead. And if you are a bit shy, you can post your questions in the chat box, and I'd be happy to share that with the panel as well. Okay, I don't see any hands at the moment, so I'll give it a kickstart. The first question that's coming through, panelists, from the delegates of the conference is, how do you strike a balance between your social and academic or research lives? And how do you switch your mindset from work to social life without feeling guilty that you are not working on your research and that if you are just wasting time? I'm happy for any of the panelists or all of the panelists to answer very quickly. So I'll repeat the question. How do you strike a balance between your social life and academic life? How do you switch the mind from going from work to social life without feeling guilty that you are not actually doing your research and as if you feel as if you are wasting your time?
So since no one's volunteering, I'll volunteer. That's something that I've struggled with a lot, but I think it's having dedicated time where you don't think about work, but it's having to be actively not thinking about it. So for me, if I will stop working a certain hour in the day and not work on the weekends sometimes, and then say that this is dedicated time for relaxation and spend time with people. I think it's a learned technique you eventually get. I think I used to be very stressed and constantly think about work, and it's not a healthy way of thinking. I think our resident psychologists probably have a better answer than I have, but I just think about, I have dedicated time. Between these hours, I'm not doing anything. I'm resting my mind. And if I focus on that being the thing, I won't then think about work.
Great. Other panelists, Bronwyn, do you want to give that question a stab?
I think that if we're all honest with ourselves, it's something that we all still continue to struggle with them, whether you were at school or whether you are very settled in your position and work. And so I think striking work-life balance is something that that we all continue to negotiate on a daily basis with every decision that comes our way. And so what becomes important, of course, is to prioritize, what is important and what is necessary, and to actually just engage in that. And part of engaging in good self-care is saying to yourself that it's okay if I don't get to this today or this week, but let me try to prioritize, let me try to organize things so that I'm not feeling as as overwhelmed by all the tasks. Because if we're honest, being a young person who is, if we all cast our minds back to being at university for the first time, or perhaps our very first appointment in sort of a dream or career job, you want to get involved in everything. You want to be the person that says yes. You want to be, be as involved as you can and take all of the opportunities before they may disappear. And so that's a lot of pressure, and that can feel very overwhelming, and you want to be able to do everything, but you need to, it's important to also acknowledge that those opportunities may come around again. And so what can you do to just, alleviate some of that pressure on yourself to want to do everything? And I think as I said, I think that's something that we all still negotiate on a daily basis, but it is so important. And it is so important that people who are new to academic spaces in particular understand that fundamentally, nobody's going to make time for your self-care more than you. So you need to prioritize that, and you need to create those boundaries for yourself and be okay with knowing that there may be something left for tomorrow to do as well. So hopefully that helps in some way.
Thank you. So Prof. Feleni and Prof. Oladimeji, would you like to add to that, or would I have a question in the chat box that came to me first, and then I have a hand up, and maybe I can pose the next question to the both of you. Would you be okay with that?
Yes.
Sorry, not.
Okay. So I have a question in the chat box from a member of the audience. How can we make the voice of young researchers to be heard by policymakers and decision makers? This question is for Prof. Feleni and Prof. Oladimeji.
Thank you so much, Natisha, for that question. I think that as part of the South African Young Academy of Sciences, we can ensure that we raise a voice so that it is heard, and ensure that we incorporate whatever decisions that we have into the decision makers so that the young scientists are heard. I think the program for South African Young Academy of Sciences is a start-off point for us to discuss those issues so that we incorporate all the issues raised to the policymakers. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And I'm going to hand that same question over to Prof. Oladimeji.
Thank you so much. I think yeah. So that's one way of doing it. Just like the previous speaker said, that the structural approach, whereby science part of ourselves, we are part of processes of policy making, and we also find our presence in those processes. I think also it's important that we look at what mentorship can, how far it can take us. I would think if I am a student under a big project that is being hosted by, say, Prof. Salim, yes, I'm working in the lab. And running that sequence, genomic sequence, and all of that. And if it's my mentor, I will use that opportunity to contribute to the policy making process, because it's big up there, but I'm here doing the job. So mentorship is an important, a mechanism to ensure that young scientists, upcoming scientists, define the result of their work to be part of the voices that achieve the policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, the both of you. And I have a question from the audience again. Lungani Velase, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much, Natisha, for the chance. I have two questions actually. So the first one is that from the way I've observed, I may be wrong, but from what I've observed that the universities now, most of the research which are done at the universities, they are not, they are not very novelty, more especially in the discipline where I'm working, which I am on. Because something that you'd find maybe the same study done in one province, and then the student is adapting. Maybe a study was done in Western Cape, then the student will adapt it in the KZN, or maybe it was done in a certain city of KZN, and then the study will adapt to a particular city. For instance, it was done in Pietermaritzburg, then the student will do it maybe in Durban. So for me, that's not really a novelty kind of research. So the question that I have, what can be done by policymakers to ensure that the universities continue producing, a groundbreaking research? Because as a person who got a chance to work for Human Science Research Council, I've noticed that the research that is done by universities, it's not really, that is like, especially, I don't know about other disciplines, but what I've noticed for my discipline is that most of the students are not doing that highly policy relevant research. And lastly, the question that I have, will you advise a young scientist to, to do a PhD, to work before completing a PhD? So that's my second question.
Okay, thank you so much, Longani, for those questions. Panelists, I'm going to open it up to you. There are 2 questions from Longani, and if I could have some volunteers amongst the 4 of you to answer even one of his questions.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ola.
Okay, thank you so much. If I got the question correctly, it's all about the institutional university research is not being too relevant with the society need. Is that a question? Just to check with the person.
Longani,
is that correct?
is Prof. Ola Demeji getting it right?
Okay.
Yes, he's getting
Okay,
it
okay.
right. Yes.
Thank
So
you.
yeah. So I would like to just share a scenario with you. Maybe that will sort of help. So I coordinate research in the Department of Public Health, and one of the things we do with the postgrad students, we've got many postgrad programs as MPH. We usually start heavy with them, where we say we have that concept development phase. We allocate supervisor highly enough. So we've got template in place, and that template is to engage with the individual candidate that's been allocated to. So what we want to get there is number 1, where do you work? What is your research idea? How can that research idea contribute to what you're doing? You see, so now here, we want to address the issue of relevance. We want to address the issue of logistics. So for me, I think it's just a practical approach, to start with at that level. That's called academic. But now if we are to go to the big institutional level research, I think it's also important that the province where the university are situated, the researchers or the scientists, they constantly engage, with the provincial research leaders so that they can find or better understand the issues that are there and see how they can use the scientific approach to address those issues. So in other words, it's all about creating that space or platform whereby the researchers from the institution are able to interface, with the government, the other stakeholders, so that, you bring that problems, on the table, then you begin to think about how to use scientific processes to address that. Where the problems are most of the time is where they are caused. You see, the funders want you to do a particular thing in the way they want. So the funders, they already have predetermined, results. They want to do a research on cervical cancer. And you will find out that you find yourself in an institution that, cervical cancer is not a prevailing issue in that particular environment, but you've got a funding call, then you have to also bid for, you have to compete for. But it's all about balance. But what I think that is going to be most relevant is to continuously engage with the government agency, the other stakeholder, the industry, the community people, so that at the end of the day, the result of our research, the findings of our research could meet the community needs. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Prof. Ola. And to answer the second question, I think Prof. Ola has answered that well. I'm going to pose it to the three other panelists. Lungani wants to know, should one be doing be working during a PhD or not? And maybe quick responses from the rest of the three panelists, and why?
I'll have a quick, I understood that he asked if you should work first, then do a PhD, or do a PhD first and then work. Is that what your question was?
Yes, yeah.
In which case, I think we're all going to be biased, but I think doing a PhD first opens you up to further career options, which might not be there. Even out of academia, having a PhD is learning about fundamental skills in research and presenting yourself. So doing a PhD first, I think, opens you up for further options down the line, and would be a good idea to do first, is my opinion.
Okay, I'm going to open the question from Lungani to Prof. Feleni and Dr. Coetzee quickly.
Oh, the question about the PhD.
Yes, please.
Yes, okay. Luckily, I have my students here. They know how I feel about students working for now. So, of course, we do know that PhD is a leadership program on its own, and it requires a lot of dedication and time. So for me, I would suggest that students just carry on to do their PhDs and work after. Yes, of course, I had students in the past who were doing PhD and working, and they couldn't finish on time because they come back tired and they couldn't meet some of the deadlines. So I really, really suggest that students finish their PhDs and just be dedicated on that. Afterwards, look for a job and work.
Thanks so much, Dr. Coetzee.
Yeah, I'll agree with the colleagues. If students have the opportunity to do a PhD full-time, if they have the scholarships and the funding to do it full-time, and they can be supported throughout that period, that 3 to 4 to 5 year period, through a scholarship, then by all means focus on the PhD first. I think the reality is though that many individuals who are keen to pursue a PhD don't necessarily have enough of funding support in place. And so then it becomes a question of managing the work alongside the PhD, which we know is difficult, which we know takes a lot of time, but also we need to be supportive of those candidates and find ways to help them to then achieve the PhD, even if it's over a longer period of time. So if you have the opportunity through a fully funded program and through bursary scholarships related to the PhD to do it full-time, absolutely. But those who need to work alongside completing one need more support, and having those conversations with your supervisor in terms of what is a realistic plan going forward. How can we make sure that we support you towards completion? And those conversations in the beginning with supervisors, I think, is fundamental to staying on track.
Thanks so much, panelists. Lungani, I hope this answers both your questions. Thank you so much for the question. I do not see any hands up, any other hands up. If you would like to post a question for me to ask the panelists in the chat box. Okay, while we contemplate asking a question, I'm going to ask a question on behalf of the delegates that were at the conference. So panelists, the question that the delegates had posed to you were, what is your view on a supervisor that says they don't want to supervise female students because female students want to sometimes choose to start a family while busy with their studies? Do you think it's important to empower do you think it's important to empower upcoming scientists irrespective of their life choice? How would you deal with such a situation? So yeah, just to go back to the question, what is your view on a supervisor saying that they will not supervise a female student or female students in general, because female students often enough choose to start a family while they are busy with their studies? And what do you think is important to empower upcoming scientists irrespective of their life choice?
Yeah, Natisha, maybe just quickly from me.
Go ahead.
I would be very, very concerned with a supervisor that's making comments like that. Key to our pursuit in science is to attract more women into the field, and with potentially discriminatory comments like that, if I were that young student, I would probably try to report that in some way, because I think that a comment like that is almost absolutely misplaced. And, you know, tying it into the next question, which is what will encourage or empower students, certainly not comments like that. So don't be discouraged. Find another supervisor who's willing to work with you.
Absolutely. I'd like to hear from the other panelists. I don't see any questions as yet from the audience. So I'll give the panelists quickly a chance to, respond to this, because yes, you're correct. It's a very sensitive topic, and we need to address these very early on, because we want to create opportunities equally and take away that gender disparities. So I see Dr. Ghulam, you have your camera on, you can go ahead.
Briefly, that is an unacceptable point of view for someone to have. That person should be reported and should not be in working or be allowed to supervise students. That's misogyny has no place in science and academia. If this is a real situation based on that's actually happening, please report them somewhere along the line to someone you can trust in your institution if that really happened to someone who's listening in on this. It is not acceptable, and that person should no longer be working at your institution. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks for that. I'm gonna give the chance to Prof. Ola. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I think let's look at it this way. The dynamics differ with different institutions. In some institutions, you allocated a supervisor based on your research concept and the capacity that are in that institution, except when they have some deficiency, then you may be allowed to suggest or rather they look outside. So it's not always the case that a candidate will have a final say that I want a particular supervisor, I do not want this particular gender. But like you rightly said, it's very sensitive. I'll just share with my own little experience with you, having to have had, I think most of the PhD students are supervised. I think about 60% of you. I've had that experience. A person calling, I am getting, word next week, 2-3 weeks after that, hey, supervisor, I'm going on. Then a few months after, I don't just feel well. So then you have to take a bit of a break. So I think it's all about understanding different scenarios that play out in life, event, and we bring that, to the supervision space as well. I feel that we need to create that kind of awareness early enough. It's not about the choice of the gender. It's really about the skills. It's really about, how you impact kind of things you want to achieve from the PhD program. So it's I don't know if we call it a literacy around doctoral program, so that we can begin to unpack, make people to be aware that, it's not that gender issues, in PhD supervision would be some sort of hindrances, but rather we should begin to look at the skill, the kind of the kind of the exposure you going to the candidate will be having through the program. So it's quite sensitive, but again, I think it's something that a kind of discussion that we really need to be having, and that will take me to the issue of should one do a PhD before working, or also should someone combine the two? I've been done with that. It's the same thing with the dynamics. The plays are different. You find out that there are situations whereby an opportunity presents itself, you have to do the PhD and you don't have a job. Then sometimes you find yourself within the job space. For example, most of the academia, you are a lecturer, you're in Stellenbosch, you are in UCT, you want to move on to the next level. It's conditional for you, it's required. You have to do that alongside with your job. And you will find out that within that department or that unit, you don't have the luxury of time. They're not going to give you 3 years that it will be required for you to do it. Or rather, the PhD program is within the university. So these are different dynamics that we also look at and consider. So all I'm trying to say is that there is no one fixed one size fits all kind of approach to some of these issues. It will completely depend on the dynamics and how we analyze the situation that will guide us to attend operationally address those kind of issues. But these are issues that happen in development and mentoring. And these are issues we face as upcoming scientists. How we continue to dialogue and engage on the best approach to assist ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Prof. Feleni, any thoughts on this question that was posed by the delegates?
Thank you, Natisha. I was just reflecting on my situation right here. So it's funny that I supervise mostly females. They are all here. And of course, we do understand that supervisors needs to graduate, needs to, have papers going and stuff like that. But we really need to have a chat or discussions with our students about work-life balance. So I was reflecting about my situation because I got pregnant when I was doing honors, but I couldn't feel anything because my supervisor was very, very supportive. We just need to be very supportive to our students to say, yes, it's okay. If you fall pregnant, if you want to start a family, that is okay. But as long as you understand that you have to work, that's very important. So we need to be very, very supportive because we spend a lot of time with our female students as well as male students, but support them throughout the journey to ensure that you are not on this alone. Yes, you'll be frustrated. Life will deal with you, family issues, research, but we need to ensure that we strike a balance between our work and life because we have to produce, children. We have to start a family on time. So we just need to be very, very supportive in this case. And should the student feel that the supervisor is saying such negative things about, no, I cannot supervise a female student, the student should change his supervisor very quickly and report that on time. But my take-home note is that we need to be very supportive and ensure that our students are performing very well in school. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, and I am cognizant of time. We are almost at the end. On my side, we have just 2 minutes remaining, and I want to say it's been amazing, webinar with the four of you giving very, very helpful inputs into how we support emerging researchers. And it speaks to the topic of today, where we said, what are the visions for the ideal support environment for emerging researchers, challenges and opportunities from grassroots to tertiary. So I want to thank the four panelists, Prof. Oladimeji, Prof. Feleni, Dr. Ghulam and Dr. Coetzee. Thank you for taking time to respond to my invite. I really appreciate that. I want to thank the audience as well for making this time before a long weekend. I want to also send a thank you out to the SciAS Exco for assisting me and supporting me for this, as well as colleagues, especially Henriette from ASAF and the ASAF team for assisting as well. It is greatly appreciated. We're going into this public holiday tomorrow, Youth Day, which is not just celebrated in South Africa. Obviously, in South Africa, it's only on the 16th of June, but there are several other countries that also cater for the Youth Day. And I think what the four panelists have contributed today speaks volumes. And I hope that the take-home message for all of our audience, because we have a blended audience, we have established researchers and scientists and academics, we have mid-level career researchers and academics, but most importantly, we also have youth, we have emerging researchers and academics. And I think it's important that you take away something that was said from the four panelists, and that we grow from strength to strength. As I said in my opening remarks, we have a history. South Africa is a country with a lot of barriers, a lot of challenges. And we speak to it tomorrow being such a historical day. But I think going forward is, from what we've heard from the four panelists, if we could take these empowering and inspiring and motivating messages forward, it's going to create a better today and a better tomorrow. So thank you, everyone, and have a fantastic long weekend.
Thank you, Natasha, and thank you to you for moderating. So excellent.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.